Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out the latest prototype from the Japanese microbrand Ikigai, and this is their upcoming Kame. This is going to be launching on Kickstarter on April 2nd of 2024, and I'll of course have a link down the video description. In case you missed it, previously featured their first model, the Maru, and I'll actually bring that one in later on in the video as well. So with that, let's go ahead and dive straight into this one, get a better feel for this model. First, in case you saw that banner there, I do want to mention, while this is a prototype, they do intend to send me a production version, and I always of course want to be upfront about that. As far as the basic specs, measuring the case from roughly the 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock position, I'm getting 39.5 millimeters. The bezel kicks out fairly significantly, but that's because of an overhang here that we'll talk about further, and that's coming in at 41.8 millimeters at the 3 to 9 position, which is going to be the farthest points. The bezel at the round portion, so in between that, is only coming in at 40.1 millimeters, so a pretty significant difference there. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug-to-lug is a nice wrist versatile 46.8 millimeters. The total thickness isn't too bad at all for a dive-style watch, and it's only coming in at 12.3 millimeters, and that is inclusive of this crystal. The crystal itself is a very subtly domed sapphire crystal. As you can see, it gets that nice single dome distortive effect as you move off axis there, and we'll check that out further as we get to outdoor footage and otherwise. The movement is the nice reliable Miyota 9039. For those who aren't familiar, basically the same movement as the 9015, but going to be a no-date variant. So you're going to have all the things that you've come to expect there around a 42-hour power reserve, hacking, hand winding, higher beat, 28,800 beats per hour, all that kind of good stuff, and nice reliable workhorse movement. Being a dive-style watch, this does come with a respectable water resistance of 200 meters or 20 atmospheres, so plenty decent there for your basic dive needs. As far as the weight, sized to my 6.5-inch wrist, on this factory included bracelet, you're looking at 151.9 grams, so right in the middleweight territory. It doesn't feel too heavy on the wrist, but definitely isn't one that completely disappears either. So now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deeper and get a better feel for what this is like to live with. First, for the colors. This particular offering is going to be available in 3 variants. There's the purple we're looking at today, there's additionally an orange version, as well as a blue version. Each of them are going to have some of the same signature characteristics. All throughout this design, you're going to see nods towards sea turtles, and that is really front and center in the middle layer of this dial. As you can see, that pattern on there, it's very distinctive, very unique, and it's quite reminiscent of the back of a sea turtle shell, or of a turtle shell for that matter. Really like that touch. I think that's a great application. Additionally though, you're going to have a lot of layering to this dial. So as you move out, you can see going up to the next layer, moving out on the outer ring, you have more of like a satin, kind of just smooth finish. But you do additionally have a really beautiful fume, and that's particularly accented on this purple version. I love the way this picks up the light and just plays. It almost gives me that kind of like frosted ornament effect from a Christmas tree. Really beautiful. The dial itself is rather sterile, which I think was a good call. They didn't include any logo or any printing anywhere on the dial itself. But as you move out towards the perimeter in the farthest edge, you can see the last layer, which is going to be that very steeply sloped rehaut, which functions as a chaptering as well. One of the things that's really nice in attention to detail touch is you might have noticed at the 12 o'clock position going from the 12 to the 1, there's the Ikigai namesake that is actually printed there. What's really cool about that is each letter actually is functional in that that represents the hashes that you see throughout the rest of the dial. So that was a really nice and interesting touch. And part of the way they accomplish that is you might have noticed that between the 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, there's the I at the front and end of the name. But additionally, those actually carry over in the 5-minute increments as you move all the way around. Really cool touch there, and it's subtly incorporated, so it's not too ostentatious or gaudy for that. And I think it's a really neat little nod for the brand and way to keep that dial sterile while at the same time having their distinctive branding. As far as the handset, you can see that this is going to be what I would describe as a modified Dauphine style handset. We've seen a lot of this lately, and this is going to be a pretty traditional application. So you're going to see that crease down the middle, you have polishing, and then dual facets on both sides, as well as a very wide loom application that we'll check out here momentarily. The second hand, again, is going to be a pretty traditional hand there, and that is going to be full polish with just an arrow and a nice fine tip. As far as the markers themselves, the markers you can see are going to be what I would describe as like a kite shape for them. You can see that they are larger at the 12, 3, 6, and 9 than they are at all of the in-between ones. What's neat though also with the 12, 3, 6, and 9 is they do actually overhang. So playing into that layer effect there, you just get more depth that comes through. They almost have like a teeth kind of construction, which reminds me of like a Seiko Monster in that sense. But again though, it's going to be reminiscent of, as we'll see throughout, the turtle shell and just kind of the sharp edges that they have in that perimeter there. As far as the loom on this does have a nice application of loom, which in keeping with the dive styling is something that you'd come to expect here. I found that this not only glows pretty strongly, but it performs pretty well as well. I would like to see the hands themselves kicked up a little bit, but we'll talk about that further as we go throughout the video. As you move across lighting conditions, you can see that this does get nice accents. For that, you can pick up some of that striking vibrancy of that dial and some of the light play that you get with the dial texture as you shift between lighting conditions. Additionally, you can see that there is a loom application on the crown as well, so that's always a fun touch. In keeping with its dive styling, this features a 120 click unidirectional bezel, and we'll check out that action here momentarily. As we've already seen, this is one of the most unique design elements of the overarching watch. As far as the basic construction, it's still going to be your traditional round shape, so that's going to be familiar. However, it does have those notches principally at the 10-minute increments. Those are interesting from a functional stance in that they do give you some additional purchase. However, it's with a trade-off because they do protrude a little bit, and we'll talk about that under the action. In addition to those notches, though, you can see, as we already saw, the loom is applied down in there. In between, they do have this bevel kind of angle cut where they have the numerals actually typed out there as well, which that's a pretty cool touch as well. As you shift over, you can see principally going to be polished as far as those accents on the side. Then it shifts over to a kind of blasted finish or texture where it gives really that satiny appearance to it. You then have a traditional dive type layout here where you do have hashes all the way around, as well as your 10-minute numerals, with the exception of your 55 to 5-minute, where you do have the 3 notches. So that's a little bit unique there, and it does somewhat change up the overall. Whereas you typically have these at the 10-minute, you do have that prominent one at the 12 o'clock position, and that again is in keeping with the overall shape, as you'll see on their Kickstarter campaign with a turtle shell. So that's an interesting touch there. This is something that I expect is going to be polarizing for many people because it is so different. As far as the bezel action, let's go ahead and listen to that. Very satisfying tactile click. Additionally, there is virtually no play whatsoever. It has maybe the slightest bit of wiggle, so that's pretty well dialed in. As you can see here from manipulation, it's not too bad. So even grabbing into those kind of chamfer cut flat areas, it's a little bit slippery because of the polish, but it's not too bad. However, if you grab a hold of these actual teeth, it really gives you a deep bite and purchase. And I expect that actually with having gloves on, that would give you even more purchase than you typically would have on a bezel, because it is much more aggressively milled than you would have on any traditional milling, because you can actually wedge your fingers completely in there. So I think that's pretty well done. And while I don't think that everyone is necessarily going to be crazy about the design of this from a look perspective because it is so unusual, that being said, I do think functionally it works better than I had expected that it might. With that though, it does have that overhang as we've already talked about, so that is something that could possibly catch on you a little bit. I haven't found it to be any issues or any kind of hot spot in regular usage, so I don't think that's going to be particularly problematic. Shifting over to the case really has quite a beautiful flow to it. As you can see, it has graceful downturn to the lugs, but the entire case itself really actually just has that kind of flowing silhouette. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially with this deep set case back, is it really just melts perfectly into the wrist. It wears actually a heck of a lot better than I was expecting from looking at the visuals. I couldn't believe, as we'll see here in the wrist footage, just how well it actually does nest on my 6.5-inch wrist. So that's a really nice touch there as well. As you can see, it does have a beautiful milling in the side here. So that really breaks it up. So you've got principally brushing, and then you have kind of like that blasting inside of that kind of teardrop shaped milling. Additionally, as you move up from that, you do have a traditional mirror chamfer. However, you can see that starts off skinny and it widens out as you go for the lugs. Looking at the lug silhouette, you can see that really changes up the overall look. It visually slims those down, despite the fact that they still have some stoutness to them. They really, I think, actually keep a little more of a graceful flow than they otherwise would. And I think that works well, especially in just looking at the graceful flow that you see in a sea turtle, especially with its fins moving around up there, or front legs, I guess, moving around. I think that is in keeping with that. So that's a nice touch there as well. Looking at the 3 o'clock position, you can see that this does have integrated crown guards, with the crown being located at the 3 o'clock position. As for the crown itself, this is measuring in at 7.2 millimeters at the base of it. As you can see, it is kind of a wedge-shaped construction for that, so that is going to be at the thickest point. Plenty sufficient, especially with as far as this protrudes, to grip a hold of, but we'll come back to that momentarily. As far as the milling, you can see this kind of a gear cut, and in keeping with the dive styling, this is a screw-down crown. As we already saw, it does feature their logo, and it is loomed for that signature also. Shifting over to the case back, again, in keeping with the dive styling, this is a screw-in construction for it. Principal finishing is going to be brush on the exterior and then more of a blasted on the interior. This has a really nicely embossed pattern in the back where you can see, again, the nod to that sea turtle, but then additionally it does have the wave just to evoke the ocean, but then it also has, of course, a nod to their Japanese namesake or their Japanese locale as well with some of the background accents there. So that's a nice touch. The case back, as we already saw, is very deeply set, which really helps this to wear nicely. Shifting over to the bracelet, you can see this sits nicely on my 6.5-inch wrist. The bracelet itself tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 18mm at the clasp. It does feature a well-incorporated female end link. I say well-incorporated because the end link is actually set higher up, or the first link is set higher up in the end link than many that we've seen recently, which gives a nice smooth flow and drop. It is a basic 3-link construction, however it has an angle cut to that which gives a distinctive and unique look. The bracelet finishing is going to be principally brushing down the length of it, however it does have chamfer cuts and polishing on the outside, so that's a nice touch there as well. It is retained with screws, so it's going to be nice and easy to size. If you don't already have a quality screwdriver, I will have one linked down the video description. Highly encourage you to pick one up, and also to make sure that you keep those screws snug. As far as the articulation, I've actually found the articulation to be pretty solid. This is something I know they are intending to improve on the production version, so I'm looking forward to that because I think it already works pretty well. Shifting over to the clasp itself is a traditional double pusher construction. It is going to be a triple finish where you have blasting in the middle, then you have principally brushing, and then polished chamfers on the outside, and of course does have their signature and logo down the middle as well. As you open that up, it does have a milled bridge, but one of the nicest things is this is going to be a toeless micro adjust clasp. So all you have to do is push in that button, and then you have a full range of articulation without having to get a spring bar tool or anything along those lines. So that is a nice touch there as well, so you can really get that fine tune. That is a ratcheting style, so you can just push that in directly on the wrist without having to take that off. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for this watch and what it's like to live with, let's go ahead and bring in a few different comps for different reasons, and we'll see why. First up, here it is next to give you an idea of a 40mm. This is next to a Henry Archer Aqua, and this gives you an idea as far as just the overall presence. As you can see, this I feel like has a little more of an overall kind of case presence because of that bezel, especially with the overhang, but I do think the Henry Archer has a little more Dow presence to it, so that gives you an idea there. Next up, bringing in another atypical purple application. This is the Zelos Black Tip GMT, and you can see here just a different execution and different kind of coloration of that purple. You can really just get an idea of both of them have their own type of vibrancy and light play. And then here it is next to the original Ikigai, and this is the Maru. And just gives you an idea here as far as the significantly different styling between these. This one, its real claim to fame was what people refer to as like that Tron style pattern that it has on the side with that loom application. But you can see they really are just going for bold designs and really completely unique between these two. Alright, so now that hopefully gives you a better idea of this overall model, let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, some critiques, as well as the summary. First, for the positives, I've got to say, as we've seen hopefully throughout with this varied footage, the Dow vibrancy and light play on this is excellent. I love the color that they chose for this purple. I love the kind of undertone of the not only fume, but that satiny sheen that gets to it. And then, of course, with that very unique and distinctive turtle pattern, which is excellently incorporated in the middle. I think that's great. Just like with their past model, it's not going to be for everybody, but I appreciate that they're coming up with original designs. Additionally, I do think that for this turtle theme, they really thought through every detail as they looked over this and really tried to incorporate everywhere they could with those little accents, and I think that's pretty cool. A lot of subtle details, especially that Ikigai as you look at the 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock. That's such a cool little nod. Toeless Micro, that's always something I'm going to be pleased with there. I think it's become all but a standard option for this price point, which, speaking of, this is coming in at $399. For the price point, I really think you're getting a pretty solid package overall. I think it is pretty well finished, and additionally, I do think it is pretty feature-packed. But that's not to say it's perfect. So let's talk about some of those critiques. And there are some things that I would like to see cleaned up on the production version. One is an overall design element, and this is something that I don't expect going to change. I probably would have preferred had they done the crown at, instead of the 3 o'clock, down at probably the 4 o'clock position to tuck it in a little more. I realize it would have impacted the case milling and kind of the symmetry there, but I do think with already having the overhang that this has for the bezel, it causes the crown to just stick out a little bit far from my personal taste. I think tucked and nested a little more at the 4 o'clock would have probably worked better for the overall design language. However, I will say functionally, I don't think this has had really any impact in that I haven't ever had this digging into the back of my wrist or anything along those lines. So that's largely just going to come down to a subjective design choice there. One thing though that I do think they could have done, even if they kept this at the 3 o'clock position, is you can see the crown guard sits proud of that bezel. I would have liked to have seen them just follow the same silhouette and go with the cutout there. So tuck that just a little more. Again, that might have allowed them to nest the crown just a little bit deeper, which I would have preferred. The bezel itself, as we've already talked about, the design I think is going to be very polarizing for people. I know that a lot of people are not going to be crazy about these ridges, and it's something for me I go back and forth on. I appreciate it for what it is, and especially for the nod to the turtle aspect. And then functionally, it does actually work, but it is something that does take some getting used to, especially with the 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock here with having that triple notch. So that's something to be aware of, but it's something I think most of you, if you like the design, will get past pretty easily. The loom colors. One of the things here that you might have noticed is you can see there is a difference in the shade of daytime between the hands as well as the markers. That's something I'm pretty much never crazy about, and the same is true here. I wish that they would have either standardized with white all the way around or that kind of off-white like a C3 would have with that kind of little bit of greenish hue. So I would like to see that cleaned up on the production version. I do know they are intending to kick up the loom, and I'm hoping that that's part of that, where they standardize that as far as the coloration there. And then finally, this is an easy item for them to clean up during manufacturing or production, but the clasp itself is just a little bit sharp on this edge here, and I do sometimes feel that on wrist, especially if it's a little bit snug. They really just need to break that edge a little bit. It's nothing too bad, and I'm certainly not cutting my finger or anything, but it does give a little bit of a chafing and kind of discomfort there. So that's something, again, it'll be easy enough for them to clean up in production, but it is something I'd like to see an improvement made. So where does that leave us overall? Ultimately, like we can say for so many different ones, especially with original designs, this is definitely not going to be for everyone. I realize that the design itself, especially the bezel, is going to be polarizing, but I do think there's a lot to like about this, especially that dial. It's really quite gorgeous. The color's striking, the pattern is gorgeous, that satiny finish, I really like it. And additionally, I think the overall packaging for this, as we've already talked about, I think the fit and finish for a $400 price point, as well as the feature set, I think is pretty well spot on. So overall, if this is something that the design does appeal to you, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. If not, I understand. Alright, so I hope this has been helpful for you getting a look. If you did enjoy this, as always, give that like button a tap. If you haven't already done so, smash that subscribe button and drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you like the design? Is it a little too bold for you? What's your turn off, if any, for it? Can you get past the bezel, that kind of stuff? And then finally, which of the colors are your favorite? This purple is definitely mine. Thanks for watching.